Well, hello there, good people and fellow hustlers. It's the Big Heavy coming at you today with the truth about side hustles. And this comes from my own experience with 20 plus years of side hustling, as well as some things I've observed. And what I worry is ultimately a bit of a false culture and a false narrative around side hustles and what they entail, how much work you have to put in, and what the return ultimately looks like for a given level of effort. Now, I can promise you there's going to be absolutely zero footage of me with expensive cars in the background. I'm not going to be sitting on private jets with sexy ladies or any of that stuff. There's no program that you can sign up for only $99.99.99 that will guarantee you a 6 bazillion figure income or any of that nonsense. Just going to get to the straight dope, talk about my experience and what you should expect and kind of how you should set some of your own benchmarks and milestones as you do proceed with your own side hustles. Now, for context, this YouTube channel is one of my two primary side hustles. This right now is monetized, which means YouTube actually pays me for the content I put out there. They pay me a whopping 40-ish dollars a month at this point. So obviously I'm not quitting my day job anytime soon. And I do have a fairly lucrative day job, which brings up kind of the first point of side hustles. I think one of the key elements to understand about a side hustle that's often underplayed and undercommunicated is the hustle's really the key element of it, and not in the sense that there's some goofy stuff you can do, or there's some little tear in the matrix and you can kind of wiggle your pinky in there and pull out a giant bar of gold or anything. But the fact of the matter is that a side hustle, just like any endeavor where you expect some sort of monetary reward at the end, requires hustle. It requires hard work. All the big YouTube people, all the people that are yapping about their private jets and their Lambos and all that thing, generally have an organization behind them. They generally spent years building a marketing pipeline. They've produced content which may or may not be of any good quality or whatnot, but they've got thousands of hours of input before they start getting that significant output that they want to, blab about and tell you how amazing it is. But at some point along the way, unless, they were gifted some magical opportunity, they had to put in those thousands of hours to get to that point. And probably the first question you should ask yourself as you contemplate a side hustle is, could I apply that incremental effort that I'd invest in a side hustle somewhere else? And do a little bit of a cost-benefit analysis. If you haven't heard that term before, it's kind of a management 101 type of term where you look at the cost of doing something, you look at the benefit, and hopefully they're close-ish. And then you can apply a little finger to the scale on either side and decide if you want to do something. But generally that's a good test to do. So if the cost is up here and the benefit's down here, you probably want to think twice about it. If the cost is down here and the benefit's way up here, you're probably being hoodwinked for the most part. I don't think there's that many opportunities out there that just have this tiny cost and this massive, huge benefit. Otherwise, we'd all be living on islands and we'd all be drinking umbrella drinks. So hard truth number one about side hustles is that they require hustle, particularly if you're going to expect some significant amount of remuneration. If you're sitting there and you've got a job where you make 50 grand a year, 100 grand a year, $1 million a year, whatever it is, think about the effort you put into that primary job and then think about applying that same effort for a similar result to your side hustle. Ideally, your side hustle has some sort of multiplier where maybe you put in 80% of the effort for 100% of the result, but you're not going to be putting in 4% of the effort that you apply to your day job and making 6,000x the return on that 4% effort. And again, there's no secret program, there's no matrix. The man's not trying to hide information from you. All these videos about the secret, whoever doesn't want you to know, are basically just BS to get you to watch somebody else's video and help contribute to their side hustle. So hard truth number two is looking at that investment of time that you'd put into a side hustle and deciding, should I put that somewhere else? One of the obvious places you could put that is in your primary hustle. You may have a job where you get a bonus. You may have a job where you get paid hourly, and applying some extra hours might give you some more remuneration. So sit down and ask yourself, I have 24 hours in a day. I have this fixed amount of time. Where should I spend those hours that gives me the best return? That return may not always be monetary. If you're doing a relatively rote job or a job that you don't particularly enjoy, investing that extra hour in that job may give you some money that's interesting, but it might not bring you new skills. It might not bring you satisfaction. It might, cause you to miss some element of your life that you'd otherwise enjoy. So I would think about your life not in terms of all the money that you want to get or these opportunities you want to go after, but carefully spending those fixed 24 hours that each of us has in a day. No matter if you're Mr. Beast or you're Mr. Ed or you're whoever, you still have those same 24 hours, and how you apply them is what ultimately differentiates us. Now, the next hard truth about side hustles that I want to talk through with you is there's basically two types of businesses, for lack of a better phrase, that each of us as human beings with those 24 hours in our day can ultimately invest in. One is what I would call kind of a transactional hustle, for lack of a better phrase. And what I mean by that is you do a thing, you get some sort of payment for doing that thing, and then that's the end of the transaction. There's tons of examples for this. If you work an hourly job, you provide 1 hour of your labor, you get paid for that 1 hour, and that's kind of done. You don't necessarily get more money later because you worked that hour. You can't get that hour back and do something else with it. It was a one-time, fixed in space transaction. If I have a side business where I manufacture socks, I can produce 100 socks. I sell those socks to 50 people, assuming all those 50 people all have 2 feet. And now I have 0 socks. I hopefully have some money because I charged more for my socks than it cost me to make them, but I can't get those socks back. I can't resell those same 50 socks. It's kind of a point in time transaction. Now you can contrast that with an asset-based business model where you make something and then you continually get some form of royalty or some form of payment for that thing that you made. So YouTube's a perfect example of this. I create a video, I put it out on the platform, and it sort of sits there forever. And when people watch it and go through all the annoying ads that are in the beginning of the video or towards the end of the video, those companies pay YouTube. YouTube gives me a cut of the action. And I produce this thing at a fixed point of time, but I continually get paid for it as time goes on. Some other examples of that might be if you buy a house that you rent out, you own this thing, you now have this house, and you can continually get money from it by renting it out. That doesn't necessarily mean you no longer have the house. It's what the business folks would call an asset that you can continually make money off of. And the value of that asset doesn't necessarily diminish each time you use that to generate some new money. Now, the reason I went through that long and hopefully not too convoluted explanation is because when you think about a side hustle that hopefully complements or augments your day job, you want to think about doing something that maybe is a different business model than your day job. So for most of us, our day job is purely transactional. We show up for a day, we do some work, and we get paid for appearing for that day. If you stop working for a given amount of time, maybe you use up vacation or whatnot, but if you're not working, you're essentially not getting paid. So it's a transactional business model. I think for side hustles, where I would recommend starting your thought process is on how do you start to produce assets and how do you produce stuff that lives out there that generates money. The old saying is as you sleep. The great thing about creating asset-based side hustles is, again, that they do generate that money while you sleep. Once you create a thing, it continues to make money throughout its life. But of course, the negative aspect is you have to invest a relatively significant amount of time generally to create those assets. And the money you make off of the use of those assets is obviously way less than what you paid. So if I buy $1 million house and I rent it out to people, I'm obviously not going to rent it out for $1 million each night. I might rent it out for $200 a night. So it's going to take me a lot of nights to pay back my initial $1 million that I invested in that asset. But hopefully, if I've planned my hustle properly, it's not going to take me forever to get paid back on that $1 million house. And hopefully that $1 million house appreciates in value. So when I do decide to get rid of that asset, it's worth more than when I initially created it. The other reason I went through that explanation is because I think for most of us, the primary asset we have to invest in our side hustles is time. Generally, if you're on YouTube watching a video about side hustles, and no offense because I've done plenty of that myself, it's not because you have $10 million sitting in your trust fund that you're just looking to throw around and have some fun with. It's generally because you're somebody that has, somewhere between limited to reasonable means. You've got time, but you don't necessarily have piles of cash that you go and invest in that $1 million house that you then rent out. So by thinking in terms of where do you invest that time and trying to focus that investment on stuff that brings you longer term value, I think is a good way to think about side hustles. And it's a way that's a little bit more honest than some of the get rich quick side hustle content that's out there. If I'm putting a couple hours a week, or, in my case, I put maybe 0 to 5 hours of time into this YouTube channel per week, I don't expect a huge return. I don't expect that I'm going to have $1 million coming in a year based on the fact that I put in 5 hours a week. But the more weeks I put in those 5 hours, the more assets I create out there, the more that income level starts to increase. So you're essentially investing those 5 hours versus just selling them for some fixed hourly rate that doesn't create any longer term value. Thinking about things in this way will also hopefully tune your BS detector a little bit. There's videos out there on how you can make zillions of dollars in the stock market or the real estate market or whatever. Can you do that? Absolutely yes. But that's an asset-based business where you need a pretty reasonable amount of money to go and acquire those assets. And when you see some video or you hear somebody talking or you see a book or whatnot that says, how to make millions of dollars in real estate with no cash of your own, the first two chapters are invariably about how you have to go out and meet rich people, get them to give you a whole pile of cash, and then you get to go and buy all these assets and use that to kind of get your stake. And again, frankly, if you're, like me sitting here watching videos on YouTube, you probably don't have thousands of rich friends that are just sitting there with their closets overstuffed with gold bars saying, boy, I wish my friend the big heavy would knock on the door so I could give him 500 grand to go out and start some ridiculous money-making scheme. So how do you actually find a good side hustle and set realistic goals for it? So first off, get that investor mindset. And again, you probably don't have piles of cash, but you do have those 24 hours in a day, and you want to invest them wisely. So I would look at side hustles that don't necessarily have income today as the number one priority. I could literally go out and dig holes and make more than I do off of the time I invest in this YouTube channel. But the reason I do this is because I'm learning how to do video editing, I'm refining my public speaking, I'm learning how to create content, and I'm building assets that go out and sit out there and hopefully ultimately get me above the $44 that I'm bringing in today. And if you're not interested in this, digital YouTube content type model, maybe you're interested in real estate, maybe you're investing those hours in going and working with a realtor and you're doing, yes, answering phones, driving people around, doing stuff that's kind of boring and is not worth your time on an hourly wage basis, but you're learning a business and you're getting that knowledge asset that ultimately lets you do something that amplifies your ability to do well in the real estate market. So that's probably my first tip, is don't necessarily look at a financial return as your number one aspect to what you're getting out of your side hustle, but look more in terms of what knowledge do you gain, what skills do you gain, does this create a asset that ultimately makes you a better, more valuable person in the long run. Now, that's not to say that transactional side hustles are a bad thing. Maybe there's something that you like doing where you can get paid transactionally and it's sort of a win-win. For me, over the past 10 years or so, that's been writing. I ghostwrite and write under my own name for some technology blogs. I get a couple $100 an article, and I'm at the point where I can bang out a 1,000-word article in an hour or so on the weekend before the kids wake up. It's something that keeps my writing sharp. It's something that I enjoy doing, and it, at the moment, has a significantly higher return than some of the stuff I'm doing in YouTube. The problem is, after about 10 years, I've kind of hit a plateau, and I want to build out my knowledge and explore some other areas. So here we are. Now, if you are going down that transactional side hustle model, the advice I'd give you there is every now and then go and look at your pricing. There's a lot of easy ways to do that. You can go and try and get a new gig and see what the pricing looks like. You can try and raise your prices with your current customers. And if they're willing to accept that price raise, then you're probably underpriced. And just as you spend some time doing a hustle, you should be getting better at it and you should be able to command higher revenue. When I started the writing thing, I probably spent about 6 months writing articles for free and then parlayed that into, I think my initial paid writing gig was like $100 an article. And again, now I'm 200 to 300 plus per article. So it's moved up nicely and it's a nice little secondary income stream that at the moment ultimately funds some of my camera gear and some of the things that I use to now invest my time into building out this YouTube channel. The other tip I'd give you is see if there's ways that you can maximize the value of some of the assets that you're creating in your side hustle. There may be coaching programs you can offer. There may be ways to remix your content and put it on other platforms. Maybe you really like to write and you want to jump into YouTube, which is kind of the path that I took. Or maybe you're on YouTube and you ultimately think you might be interested in exploring writing. Maybe you're great at editing and you want to sell those editing services that you developed through your own YouTube channel. So don't be afraid to take your hustle and see if you can push it in other dimensions. And the final tip I'll give you, and probably again, one of the hard truths of side hustles is there may be a point where you're kidding yourself, or maybe trying to paint a little bit of a rosy picture on what's ultimately a hobby. And it's okay to have hobbies. And that might sound like a weird thing to say if you're 20 and single and feel like you have all the time in the world. You may be nodding your head if you're in your 40s and you have kids and job obligations and you feel guilty taking 5 minutes and doing something that's not focused on your career or your family. Maybe in that case you're trying to brand it as a side hustle and add some money making layer on top of something that should otherwise just be a hobby. I think it's okay to be a human being and actually go out and do things for the sheer joy of doing them. Not everything has to be on YouTube, not everything has to be on the socials and be clickable and have a thumbnail and all that crap. So if you're trying to turn something that's a hobby and something that brings you joy into a side hustle, think very carefully and make sure you're going into that willingly, and you're going into that as a way to make that activity more interesting and more valuable and more fulfilling to yourself versus, hey, I love to fish or golf or whatever, and I'm going to try and create this channel because I feel like I should turn my hobby and turn what I'm passionate about into some money making scheme. So hopefully that shed a little light on the hard truths, the good, the bad, and the ugly of side hustles. If you're thinking about them, then go into it eyes wide open. Make sure that you're doing something that makes you a more valuable person, either by giving you new knowledge, helping you engage in different media, learning new skills, or just giving yourself permission to enjoy a hobby. Have the right set of expectations. Again, a year into YouTube, I'm making $40 a month, so I'm not exactly quitting my job and buying my Lambo or anything like that. But that's kind of where I expected to be, and kind of on the glide path that I've mapped out for what I want to accomplish with this YouTube channel. So with that, this is a Big Heavy wishing you well in whatever endeavors you undertake, and hoping to see you out there on the grind, and wishing you all the best in whatever hustles you're hustling after. Mash the subscribe, throw some feedback in the comments. I always do try and respond since, again, there aren't that many of you out there commenting, so it's relatively easy at this point. And I wish you all the best in your own hustles. Big Heavy, saying peace.